Zaror, main abhai isi premise par ek high hissa, bina chapters ya breaks key lambai, cinematic HFY kahani lik raha / rahai hoon. Narration English main rahegi, J's opni pale style set kia. Lekin structure or flow wohai hoga jo op chat ho. Immersive intro, beach main wohai short natural mid-story break exact wording key soth, or bilkul akir main wahai mandatory HFY final line, or op ka dia gaya outro block. The war had ended 1,000 years ago, yet somehow, humanity still carried its scars among the stars. They floated like bruises in the dark, hull plates dented by old flak, names etched into carbon scoring, lullabies whispered over life support hum because planets were far and children still needed sleep. Every generation promised the next that the worst was behind them, and every generation learned the same hard thing, that the universe doesn't promise mercy, only the chance to endure. The Dominion came back on a brittle morning above Kepler Gate, where space itself was braided into a light-spun ring that folded distance like cloth. Their fleets poured through like ash on the wind, basalt-gray spines, spears of cobalt fire, banners of a creed that had never forgiven human defiance. The first hour was a slaughter. The second was a math problem no one solved. By the third hour, comms devolved into prayer and static. Elara Quinn had never flown a ship. She had polished them, counted their rivets, sealed their microfractures with resin and care. She knew the names of gaskets and the smell of ozone on her palms after long shifts in the maintenance crawlways of the civilian hauler Horizon's Edge. She knew a broken thing could love you if you learned when to listen. She knew none of that mattered when a planet breaker cut your sky in half. When the Dominion beam lanced the edge from bow to stern, Elara's world tore open like wet paper. One moment she was wedged shoulder-deep in a service conduit replacing a wine-sick converter. The next, light with teeth bit through bulkheads and the deck fell out from under her. She tumbled in a blizzard of frozen tools, scream pulled from her lungs by vacuum until the emergency sealant gel blossomed like a black flower and clotted the breach. People she knew by their footsteps were gone between one heartbeat and the next. Pods. Someone yelled over a jury-rigged channel, voice ragged. To the pods. Elara moved because moving was all there was. She shoved a stuck hatch with both legs, gashed her shin, didn't stop. She passed a viewport and saw the ring of the gate in the distance, serene as a cathedral framed by fire. The pods were full. The ones that weren't full were dead. The ones that weren't dead were falling away like dandelion seeds in a storm. A pressure door bucked, failed, and the corridor behind her threw its atmosphere into the void with a howl like an animal. The only open mouth left to dive into was not human. Its skin was black stone veined with faint bioluminescent blue, and it lay half-caught in the wreckage tangle like a sleeping leviathan. A Dominion warship, not intact, not awake, its aft quarter shorn, its spine kinked. To climb into the wound of an enemy and make a prayer out of terror is as human as fire. Elara kicked off a collapsed stanchion, heart going like a startled bird, and slipped through the gash. Inside was cathedral dark and warm. The Dominion didn't build their warships like machines. They bred them like orchards, then taught them to sing. Walls throbbed faintly, not with breath but with the memory of it. Cables hung like vines. A taste of iron and rain flickered on Elara's tongue as her suit's filters parsed aerosols. She floated past a bank of bulbous nodules that might have been computers or organs or both. The ship moaned once, deep and unhappy. Something alive had been half-torn and half-starved and then left to dream in rubble. Elara had never flown a ship. She had held her mother's hand while the fevers took her on Gassendi Station, and she had learned then the only lesson that mattered. Sometimes the only nurse left is the one who refuses to leave the room. "Okay," she whispered, voice thin in her suit. "Okay, hey, I'm here." The command cradle was a basin of pale stone, webbed with translucent filaments. It looked like the rib cage of some impossible creature had been inverted to make a seat. When she touched it with gloved fingers, the filaments stiffened, then softened, then rose like water tendrils to wrap her hands. Every warning in every human docking manual lit up in her skull. She stayed anyway. The filaments slid along her wrists under her sleeves, seeking skin. The first contact was cold lightning. The second was a door opening over a cliff. The third was a voice. Pilot. The word wasn't a word. It was a shape pressed against her thoughts, an ache turned into grammar. Elara's back arched and the tether clipped at her hip went taut as her body tried to flinch away, and the cradle held her like a parent holds a feverish child. Not a pilot, she managed. Just Elara. Elara, the not voice said, curious, tender as wind on a candle. Directive. She saw herself from impossible angles, a girl, hair stuck to her forehead, a grease smear across her cheek like war paint. She saw the wreck field like a reef. She saw the Dominion ships as heat and vector lines and hunger. She saw the convoy of human vessels miles off, trying to thread the needle of the gate while death settled its bill behind them. Save them, Elara said. The cradle cinched like a heartbeat around her ribs. Save the humans. Define humans, the warship murmured, not to mock, but because machine minds learn like children, by edges. Elara shut her eyes. She thought of the woman who sang to cooling pipes at 3 a.m. in engineering because they whined less if you sang them steady. She thought of the boy who braided copper wire into bracelets for luck and gave them away like candy. She thought of an old man who told stories about terrariums under gold glass back on Earth, and cried only once very quietly when a comet tail lit a porthole like home. She thought of hands and laughter and stubbornness, and the way humans hold one another up when gravity fails. Us, she whispered, the ones who keep going. Directive accepted. Systems that had slept under ash for months shuddered awake. Bulkheads realigned with a sound like stone grinding on stone. The filaments at Elara's wrists crept higher, mapping the music of her nerves. The bridge lit, not with lamps but with milky translucence that set the bones of her hands aglow. Somewhere deep in the hull, a heart the size of a bus coughed once and found its beat. Can you fly? Elara asked. Yes, can I? A pause. You are afraid and very loud, yes. The ship rolled, a slow, deliberate motion that scratched sparks from the debris drift. Panels flexed. The hum under it all deepened until Elara could feel it in her molars. Lights bloomed on the Dominion tactical net as they noticed the impossible, a friendly signature moving with unfriendly intent. On their longest day, even the cruel are allowed a small disbelief. The first salvo came late, sloppy, overconfident. The warship Vrackle, a name that tasted of limestone and oath, cut its engines, sank in a gentle arc, and the barrage whispered through the space its hull had just vacated. Shield harmonics stuttered, corrected. Vrackle's weapons budded like flowers in winter and opened in lines of white. A Dominion corvette spun, opened, became a handful of frames and a long rope of gas. Elara breathed in when the ship drew power, breathed out when the batteries spat, and discovered this was how it would be. Not instruction but entrainment, not control but consent. Don't kill if you can avoid it, she said, throat raw. If you can't, then endure. The ship finished gently and angled itself to receive the next wave. The Dominion were not fools. Shock burned off quick. A cage of destroyers closed, their beams crossing like a lattice. Vrackle slid along their geometry like a skater along the border of a lake, never quite where a beam expected, turning each angle into someone else's blind spot. Elara's palms burned where the filaments had become something like skin against hers, and she found that weapons obeyed intent like muscles obey courage. The more she meant it, the truer they sang. Convoy vector, she asked. A field unrolled in her head. The convoy like a string of beads, the gate like a mouth, the Dominion like teeth. One of the transports she knew, the Lachesis, old and cantankerous and part rumor, had fallen behind. A support ship had taken a hit and was spilling atmosphere in a glitter of ice. Elara swallowed. Go. The ship surged. In a human machine, an engine is a promise. Burn this, get that. In the Dominion, an engine is an animal. Feed it fear and it will leap farther than laws allow. The core yowled, elated. Vrackle cut a path through the iron hail and reached the convoy on a vector no sane thing would attempt. The Lachesis hailed, garble and awe. Identify by the ring, identify yourself, we thought you were. Elara opened a calm and static tasted like copper on her tongue. This is Elara Quinn, she said, and let the absurdity be its own proof. On a Dominion hull. If you're smart, you don't trust me at all. If you're human, you're going to trust me anyway. Keep moving, I'll hold the knife. A silence in which someone decided to gamble. Then a woman's voice, steady, older than stars. Copy Elara Quinn, knife accepted. The Dominion flagship arrived not with fanfare but with the silence that means money and blood and mathematics all agreed. Zethar's ship wore authority like frost. Its forward guns were too big to miss and too hungry to forgive. It opened its eye and drew a bead on the bulkiest transport in the convoy, the one carrying children. Don't. Elara said to no one and everyone, and drew the ship's attention like lifting her chin. The Planet Breaker's prelude was a golden chord. Elara reached into Vrackle's bones, farther than she should, until her fingertips touched the yes/no lever inside any living thing's will, and she chose yes with all the force in her small, furious body. Shields threshed. The beam hit. It was like holding a falling house on your shoulders and humming hush to keep your arms from breaking. Metal sang in frequencies that lived behind your teeth. The convoy slewed away through the gate's threshold, one by one, each passage lighting the ring with aurora. Power, Elara asked, barely voice at all. Less, Vrackle said with a smile she felt in her chest. Enough. The destroyer screen folded inward, offended. This time they shot to kill. A brace of lances chewed through Vrackle's port plating and the ship cried out, and Elara's left ribs ached as if someone had slammed them with a boot. She sagged but did not let go. You're all right, she said. I've got you. Incorrect, the ship said, dry. We have us. They flew on that pronoun. Time went strange in battle, tight where decisions happen, loose where guilt might. Elara forgot she had a body except when pain tidied the edges of her thoughts. The gate was closer now. The convoy had narrowed. The Dominion had learned her timing. Zethar's flagship cut in with an angle that put its shadow between the last three transports and Mercy. Not them, Elara said. She reached for a thing she had no name for, some reserve beyond courage where simple refusal hardens into change. Me. She veered Vrackle out in front of the transports and fired everything she had remaining into Zethar's face. It wasn't tactic, it was thesis. The flagship blinked, surprised into a fractional late parry. A seam opened along its bow, shallow but ugly. Pride bled out with its coolant. Zethar answered with doctrine. Every gun nearby reset to one solution. Isolate target, overmatch, erase. Space filled with lines that all ended in Elara. The ship tightened around her like armor tucked in by a kind brother. The batteries sputtered and then steadied. The core coughed and then purred. The Dominion lattice snapped shut. Now, Elara told herself, now learn to be small. She dove. Vrackle rolled into the wreck field, the husk of the horizon's edge, the shards of 3 Dominion corvettes, a whispered drape of evaporating gases, and taught its gravity knives to lay thin curves no one else had budget for. The beams that should have cut them in half hit hull fragments and flash-foamed into clouds of glittering plasma. She slid in the lee of her own wreckage, then shouldered off a scrap of plating like a swimmer pushing off a wall. The Dominion followed because pride and protocol knotted them together. She let one destroyer get too close on purpose. Bite, she told Vrackle. They did. It wasn't elegant. It was mean. They clipped the destroyer's nose with the gravitives, rolled past as it snapped its spine trying to correct, and fired a spray into the seam that opened. The ship folded in a pinwheel of ugly light. Convoy. Elara gasped because endurance is mostly remembering to keep track of who you're doing this for. Last 3 approach threshold, Vrackle sang, pleased. Good, good. Her hands had gone numb and the filaments had drunk their shape and held the memory. She could let go and nothing would change. She didn't let go. Zethar must have felt something slide in the ledger. The flagship shifted to response patterns designed for enemy ships flown by ghosts. He cut his guns abruptly. He waited. He didn't shoot the last transports. He turned his wounded bow toward Vrackle and burned in, slow, patient, inevitable. Talk to me, Elara told the ship. Conversation subroutines exist, Vrackle said. It is not wise. You'll indulge me. A pause that was affection under exasperation. You are dying. Elara realized there were tears and could not spare a hand to brush them away, which was good because she had no hands to spare and the tears had nowhere to go. How much? Enough to make a lovely story, the ship said, very soft. Not enough to finish it twice. Then once, she said. We only need once. The last transports lit the gate and slid away like coins falling into a well. The ring's algorithms fluttered with the sudden math of folding. Space buckled. The Dominion fleet adjusted formation to avoid the tidal. Zethar did not turn aside. You wanted them alive, Elara told herself, and then said it out loud so the universe could hear its contract. You wanted them alive and you got what you asked for. Pay. She pulled what remained of Vrackle's charge into a single braided cord and held it in her mind with both arms like a child holds the last warm loaf in winter. She told the ship, show me where to put this. There Vrackle pointed and put a star on Zethar's hunger. She went. The warship's body was wrong for this kind of sprint. The physics said no. The Dominion said never. The human said please. They touched noses across an inch of void no one sane would live in. Elara saw Zethar through transparent hull, saw eyes like chips of glass, saw a mouth full of iron promises. She saw him see her, a child, filthy, wreck blood on her face, small as a rumor. She smiled at him, not cruel, just full of the knowledge that this could have been otherwise. He lifted one hand, a gesture like a question or a curse. Elara let go of the cord. Light ate distance. The flagship's shield flared, broke, buckled. The warship's bones gave and held and gave again. Somewhere far away, a memory of warm bread and her mother's hum came to sit beside her. The blast rolled out into the cage of destroyers like thunder laid flat. There is a kind of silence after impact that isn't quiet so much as empty of questions. The Dominion fleet reeled. The gate's folded space snapped like a sheet popped over a bed. The last human transport vanished into safety. Elara's body remembered itself in a rush. Lungs, heart, heat, ache. She wasn't sure if the stars were shaking or she was. Core temperature beyond doctrine, Vrackle said, sounding proud and apologetic at once. Sustained function unlikely. Don't, Elara said, simply because the child in her refused to hear the adult's math. They need us. Correction, the ship murmured with the patience of oceans. They needed you, you obeyed. I am content. She wanted to argue that contentment was not allowed, that surviving is not enough, that she would accept nothing less than everyone. But the filaments at her wrists thrummed a lullaby in a key she had been born humming. The ship turned its remaining angular momentum into a slow revolve so that its broken side faced only empty sky and not the glaring teeth of the fleet. Zethar's flagship drifted, half alight, its mouth full of smoke. Dominion voices crackled on a net she could taste now. Confusion first, then instruction, then fear, then the duct-taped calm of soldiers who had not expected to survive this hour and now had to learn how to live with the next one. A smaller ship broke formation and skittered forward, jaunty, young, curious. Elara could imagine its pilot's grin. The little ship pinged Vrackle with a brave, foolish light like a boy throwing stones at a cathedral. She wanted to say, "Go home. The universe is bigger than your insignia." She wanted to say, "I'm not your enemy. I'm just the part of your story that teaches you what you do next." "Can you talk to them?" she asked Vrackle. "I can sing," the ship said. "Sing forgiveness," she said, "and warning." The ship obliged, opening a band no Dominion doctrine had a ritual for. It sent a tone like the note between sob and laugh. Some of the smaller Dominion craft backed away as if a hand had pushed their chests. Zethar's flagship tried to orient, failed, oriented again, stubborn. "Hey," Elara whispered to the unblinking stars. "Don't make me a saint, make me a precedent." Her body's list of complaints grew long enough to be funny if it hadn't hurt. She let herself laugh once and coughed blood into the cradle. The filaments warmed at her wrists the way a dog curls closer to a fever and refuses to leave. She closed her eyes and saw 1,000 hands, human hands, pulling on ropes, lifting each other up into small, rattling boats, singing while the ocean tried to make them quiet. "Tell me a thing," she asked Vrackle, "because if you're going to go, you're allowed one story you didn't know, about yourself." "I was hatched in stone," the ship said. "They poured light into me until it took, and then they carved a name into my side the way you carve loves into tree bark. I was meant to travel very far and come back with answers. Then they filled me with commands instead. I obeyed those too. I did not meet anyone who asked me please until now." Elara cried without salt. "I'm sorry. I am not," the ship said. "Statistically, one good day can outweigh 1,000 obedient years." "They'll tell this," Elara warned it gently. "They'll make it clean, they'll take the blood out. Then sing it back messy whenever you can," the ship said, and Elara thought that if a machine can be wise, wisdom is just kindness that learned to fight. A shadow fell over them. Zethar's flagship had found its legs. It aimed with the deliberation of a man who has decided what his monument will be. Around it, the smaller ships jittered, wanting to help and understanding they could not. On some level deeper than doctrine, the fleet felt that this moment belonged to two creatures who had chosen to know each other. Elara searched for power and found pockets like crumbs. The ship gathered them reverently, as if they were pearls. The result wasn't enough to defy a planet breaker. It might be enough to confuse it. "On my mark," she said. 3-2, the universe blinked, not a metaphor. The gate, in cooling from the convoy's passage, banked stray harmonics and released them late, clumsy. Space hiccuped like a heartbeat skipping. Zethar's angle went hair off. The beam that should have cored Vrackle scythed low, tore a ribbon instead of a heart. The ship screamed like metal under flood. Elara gasped, felt the cradle go slick under her fingers. "Now," she said, though she did not know to what. "Now, now, now." Vrackle opened its belly and let out the last of its bright breath. It wasn't a weapon so much as a confession. It admitted all the energy the ship had hoarded under commands and fear and turned it into a curtain of white that hung between the Dominion and what they wanted to say they were. Zethar's beam hit that curtain and tore it and went through, but not clean. The flagship's gun array loosened its own bolts. Something essential unseated on its recoil. Zethar tasted his heart in his mouth and pretended it was iron. The flagship staggered to one knee on a floor that had no knees. It did not fall. The Dominion did not retreat. They held their breath with discipline and waited for permission to live. Elara breathed out and at last let the cradle take more weight than she had. She looked up at a sky that had carried her and tried to form the words that would be a goodbye big enough. She tried "thank you" and it was a toy in a cathedral. She tried "I'm not done" and it made both of them chuckle. She tried "stay" and realized that was childish magic. She settled on "you were beautiful." "So were you," the ship said with infinite courtesy. For a fragile handful of minutes, the battlefield forgot to move. In that holding of breath, the convoy finished vanishing into elsewhere, and 100,000 human lives landed on worlds that did not yet know their names, and an old man somewhere put his hand on a window and did not cry this time. The Dominion fleet, deprived of its story's ending, began to back away. Not in retreat, in reconsideration. Zethar looked at the scar his beam had drawn across the ship that had ruined his math, and understood he had met a problem he could not solve by killing. He hated that. He could not fix it. He would try later. He would fail in 100 small ways, and somewhere inside those failures a mercy would grow like a moss. Elara slept without sleeping, eyes open to starlight, body knotted, mind unspooled. Vrackle held her with the care of a bridge under snow. The ship rerouted coolant through warm channels so she would not shiver. It dimmed its lights to a human dusk. It counted its remaining operable functions like one counts letters from a lover and found enough to say a little more. When they tell this, Vrackle said at last, "What will you want them to know?" "That I was scared," Elara said, "because courage without fear is just anatomy. That I didn't want to die, that I did not wake up brave, I became it in one direction because the other wasn't allowed." "Good," the ship said, pleased. "What else?" "That you were never a weapon," Elara whispered. "You were a ship, you carried things, even this." "I like that," Vrackle said, and if ships could smile, this was the small, private curve of lips not meant for crowds. "Sleep now, I will watch." She did, or something that passed for it. She dreamed she was walking the maintenance ring of Horizon's edge again, counting rivets. Every 10th one she tapped with a knuckle like a prayer. Her mother walked beside her, singing under her breath. Somewhere behind them, a boy laced copper wire into a bracelet. Somewhere ahead, an old man lifted a leaf under gold glass and held it to the light. She woke with the knowledge that nothing that mattered had ever been destroyed in a way that mattered, and that was either faith or good engineering. When she opened her eyes, the Dominion had gone. Not far, not forever. Enough. The gate cooled to a dark halo. The wreck field drifted in slow choreography. The silence was the good kind, full of people who get to keep talking. How bad? Elara asked, because denial wastes power and she had none. "I will dim," Vrackle said. "It will be slow, it will be kind. You can stay for as long as staying is not a cruelty, and then I will ask you to go." "Where?" The ship ran a soft search through the local star feed. "There is an asteroid with a pocket under its skin. Oxygen, ice, metals, a place to sleep. Someone will come." Elara tried not to ask how the ship knew that someone would come. The universe had never guaranteed rescue. Humanity had learned to be its own. Still, some promises are tides. If you build your shelter by the sea, some morning the water will be at your door and the bread will be warm again. She let herself believe the ship and tasted the luxury of it. "Before we go," she said, and rested her cheek against the cradle's rim, and felt it warm so she wouldn't have to pretend she didn't need that comfort. "Teach me your name. Not the one they carved, the one you kept." A long hush like a hand smoothing a wrinkled sheet. "I had none," Vrackle admitted, embarrassed. "I borrowed whatever was given. Choose one for me." She smiled because this was holy. Naming is always a miracle, the smallest act of creation that still counts. She thought of light pouring into stone until it glowed, of a ship that learned no and then learned yes, of kindness in hard engineering. "Lumen," she said, "because you carried it." "Lumen," the ship tried out, shy and fond. "I like it." "Good," Elara said. "Then let's live long enough to use it more than once." They limped toward the asteroid on a trajectory a mathematician would call foolish and a poet would call true. Dominion scouts watched from a distance and disagreed with one another quietly. Far beyond, human ships burned their names into new skies and lit cookfires under new gravity and began the long practice of belonging. Halfway to the rock, the ship slowed with an awkwardness that felt like an apology. "Now," Lumen said, "please." Elara unclasped her hands from the cradle. The filaments had grown into her skin like roots. They slid out with the care of a friend untangling your hair. She trembled, and the ship tightened its straps so the tremble would not turn into a fall. The world shrank into her body and the echo of a larger body that had held her. "You'll be here?" she asked, surprised at the smallness of her voice. "Yes," Lumen said, And even when I am not, you will have been. It is enough." She scooted on her elbows, weak-kneed, toward the torn corridor that led to the makeshift airlock where her suit hung like a memory. Her fingers shook too much to seal the wrist. The ship cinched it for her with a whisper of gentleness that would have humiliated her on any other day and now felt like blessing. She clipped the tether, checked the O2, lifted a hand to the ribbed wall. "Thank you," she said, and this time it fit the cathedral. "Go," Lumen murmured. She pushed into the corridor and the door sealed behind her. Pressure fumbled its way into the small chamber. She breathed and the air tasted like stone and old oceans, and home if home had been built from strangers' kindness. The outer hatch opened and the stars were there, and her legs remembered how to push off, and she left the ship that had learned to be more than its orders. She drifted to the asteroid with a slowness that taught patience. She found the pocket under its skin, and it welcomed her, and she slept because sleep is how you pay grief down in installments. She woke to the soundless thud of something docking clumsily, a scavenger, human by the poetry of its failures. Voices came over a band that amounted to someone banging on the door politely. "Survivor," a voice called tinny, hopeful, scared on its own behalf. "We picked up a heat bruise and a story." Elara smiled because of course stories left heat. "Here," she said and coughed and said it more loudly. "Elara Quinn, I had a friend." "We saw," the voice said, reverent as a pew, "we all saw." They ferried her aboard and wrapped her in blankets that smelled like ships do when humans love them, oil and citrus and patience. They fussed, she let them. The scavenger's captain sat on a milk crate and did that old human trick of pretending to fiddle with a ring so you won't feel watched. At last he said, "You'll want to see this." They brought her to a porthole and pointed. Out there, Lumen drifted, darkening, dimming still. On its side, along a plate that had once been smooth as poured stone, something new had been etched by heat and stress, and the licking tongue of a beam gone a fraction off. Not Vrackle, not any Dominion script, but a curve and an angle that, if you squinted and tilted your head the way humans learn to do when the universe refuses to be clear, looked like the human letter L. "Elara," the captain said softly. "We don't often get to name a thing and have the sky agree." "You did." She pressed her palms to the cold and didn't mind if someone saw her cry now. The scavenger lit engines and nosed toward a path that would take them to a loose net of human ships. Behind them, Lumen turned in slow rehearsal for a sleep the stars respect. The convoy received Elara as if a little queen had come aboard bearing a treaty between grief and time. They asked her to tell it and she did, not making it clean. She left the blood in. She left the fear. She named the ship the way you name a friend in a room of strangers, and watched their faces learn it. The old man she had once known under the gold glass in a story someone else had told took her hands later and said, "We will plant that name where roots like to go." They did. In the years that flowed like a river making its own bed, every child learned Lumen along with the alphabet of the ships that kept their lungs honest. In mess halls, laughter learned a new note that people didn't recognize at first and later called courage, because they needed a label for the way the spoon you tapped on the table sounded stronger when someone at the end of the line tapped theirs too. Elara did not become a legend. Legends don't get shin splints. She became a person who had done the hardest possible ordinary thing and had survived enough to be asked to do the dishes. She helped wire a new life support ring on a ship that had been 3 ships before it and would be 2 after. She sat at the bedsides of those who did not wake and said, "I stayed once because someone needed me to. I'll stay now because you do." She taught 3 children to braid copper wire into bracelets and told them to give them away, because luck works best when it travels. Sometimes at night she dreamed the filament slid back along her hands and she felt the universe fit itself to her breath again. She woke and her hands hurt in the places where the ship had held her. She liked that hurt. It felt like a question she had answered honestly. News came without trumpets. The Dominion had pulled back to count and count again. Zethar had been disciplined and not. The fleets had found reasons not to engage at Kepler Gate for a while. Somewhere in a room with no windows, a general rubbed his temples and said, "We missed something," and signed a paper that sent food where guns would have gone. Small things that add up if you keep carrying them. Years turned the story into seed. It traveled better that way. It rooted in places Elara never went and grew into customs she would have laughed at and loved. Children traced the L in condensation on portholes. Lovers pressed their heads together and whispered, "Endure," when they meant stay. Every time the gate lit in the old way, a handful of people who remembered flinched and then breathed and patted the bulkhead like a dog. On an anniversary no one had planned and everyone had invented, a small human ship with a good sense of ceremony and a worse sense of safety turned its nose toward the wreck field and asked politely to come close. The Dominion patrol on duty weighed duty and boredom and decided to let the humans be weird as long as they were brief. Elara was aboard, hair gone iron at the edges, hands still honest. She stepped to the porthole and Lumen was there, a little darker, a little more dignified, the letter along its flank worn to a smudge you'd swear was just a trick of light unless you had named it. "Hey," she said to the ship, knowing very well how the dead don't hear and also how sometimes they do. "I kept going like you asked. It got complicated, it got good." The Dominion patrol pinged them, "Time's up." Elara pinged back, "Understood." The human ship turned, slow and polite, and before it went it flashed its running lights in a pattern that, if you were the sort to believe pattern can be prayer, spelled Lumen in a clumsy Morse. Back on the convoy, a little girl with a grease smear across her cheek asked Elara if she had been scared. "Yes," Elara said, and felt that wise machine laugh in her bones again. "And I will be again, that's the work." "What if I'm not brave?" the girl whispered. "Me neither," Elara said. "We do brave, we don't be it." The girl nodded very seriously and later, alone, braided a copper bracelet and hid it in her pocket to give away when someone needed it. Stories traveled farther than ships. They reached the Dominion every time a pilot couldn't sleep and opened an illegal channel to listen to human mess hall music, all off-key harmonies and clapping on the almost beat. They seeped into academies and sat in back rows with their feet up on chairs. Zethar grew old not in disgrace, but in usefulness, because the Empire had learned to become a little smarter in the ways that make cruelty less efficient. On his last day wearing a uniform, he signed a paper that let a convoy pass uninspected and called it logistical deconfliction. He went home and cut bread that tasted like stone and old oceans, and he could not have told you why it made him want to sit down and cry. Elara taught a class no one had invented a credential for: how to stay, intake valves and lullabies, torque specs and funeral etiquette, how to pick the right moment to tell a joke, when to slap an alarm and when to rub a shoulder. She said the sentence that had kept her alive and made a roomful of kids write it down. The way you write down spells, "We endure on purpose." When she was very old and then no longer, the convoy's ships changed the shape of their running lights for one slow night, and in that ritual, which no Dominion doctrine could account for and no human manual could define, a thing older than empires tilted its head and listened. The wreck field at Kepler Gate thinned and then did not, because time is not kind to monuments and kindness is not the point of time. Lumen held its slow orbit. Micrometeor strikes made a new language along its skin. The place where Elara had rested her cheek on the cradle's rim warmed in summer, cooled in winter, which is to say when the gate's cycles aligned just so, and you could believe in seasons out here if you tried. Pilots pointed it out to their apprentices in the way that makes more of a thing by pretending to make less. There, they'd say, casual. You can almost see the letter. That's where the story bends. The apprentices squinted and then stopped squinting and let the story bend their own in quiet ways. The way you reach for a strap when the ship shudders, The way you stay up another hour to fix a seal because you promised. The way you keep a cup warm for someone who is late coming off watch. And on nights when the convoy's music bled out between hulls and tasted like bread and oil and citrus. On nights when the gate breathed in and out as if remembering. On nights when fear sat at the table and was given a cup and a place, and told it could stay if it didn't talk over anyone. The stars themselves seemed to draw a little closer, curious, hopeful, learning. The galaxy did not soften. It learned. Empires did not become saints. They made room for exceptions. Exceptions made room for changes. Changes braided into customs that outlived their authors. Somewhere on a world with wind that had not learned the word for city yet, a child looked up and spelled out a letter with his hands because the story his grandmother told him made it sound like this was the way to call a friend home. No one conquered the dark. They carried each other through it, light to light, name to name, ship to ship, remembering the day a girl who had never flown a ship held a line no math said she could hold because someone needed her to and no one else was left. And there is a moment in any story when what you believe about yourself has to become what you do. And that day, the galaxy learned humanity doesn't conquer, it endures. Headphone, thank you for listening. Until next time, stay human, stay unbroken.